Hello, everyone. My name is Harry Odamting. I'm an associate professor at Santa Clara University and an alumni of Michigan State University. Happy to start off this conference by inviting, I'm also an editor for the journal, by the way, one of the founding editors, not the founding editor-in-chief. That goes to the person I'm about to introduce, Wando Achebe. Let's welcome Wando Achebe for her opening address.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Michigan State University. This is way too high. Okay, there we go. Okay. And thank you, Harry, for that introduction. Harry knows that I call him my first son because he's my first PhD. So I have a lot of my PhD children here, even though they're all grown people, but I still call them that. So welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and honored guests, it is a great privilege to welcome you all to the 10th anniversary celebration of the Journal of West African History. This is a momentous occasion marking a significant milestone in the journal's journey and in the broader field of West African historical studies. About 14 years ago, I dared to dream of a journal that would illuminate the rich histories of West Africa while challenging and redressing the geographies of knowledge production on the continent. Today, as we celebrate this decade of scholarly achievement, we reflect on the path we've taken. One filled with rigorous inquiry, groundbreaking research, and a commitment to diverse perspectives. Over the past decade, JWA, Journal of West African History, we call it JWA, has established itself as a leading platform for the dissemination of peer-reviewed research, offering scholars from around the world a space to explore, to reinterpret, and to challenge the region's histories. From the analysis of power in the Western Sudan to the exploration of LGBTQ organizing in Nigeria, the journal has consistently brought fresh perspectives that enrich our understanding of West Africa's complex narratives. One of the greatest strengths of the journal is our commitment to elevating the scholarship of indigenous West African historians. Through initiatives such as the JWA Mentorship Program, we've created spaces for the intellectual exchange of ideas and perspectives while supporting the work of emerging scholars. This focus on redressing systemic inequities has enriched the field, and the journal has continued to challenge conventional narratives with the vital work of both seasoned and new voices. JWA has not rested on its laurels. Through its forums and thematic issues, the journal has engaged in vital contemporary debates, whether about health and disease in West Africa or political and environmental sustainability. We remain committed to demonstrating the relevance of historical research to present-day challenges, and we are excited to announce our first French language issue this year, as well as, yes, it took us a while, as well as future plans for publishing in Portuguese and West African languages. Yes, so that's a commitment MSU Press has made, and we're very excited about possibilities there. So as we celebrate this 10th anniversary, we not only honor the achievements of the past decade, but also look forward to the future. This is a time to reflect on the progress we have made and to set new goals for the journal's continued growth and influence. We remain committed to advancing the study and understanding of West African history for years to come. As part of today's celebration, we are honored to present 4 panels, each addressing themes in West African history. The panel on archives, sources, and methods for West African history features David Glosky, John M. Mugane, and Robin Chapendillin, who will explore innovative approaches to historical research in the region. In the panel, West Africa and the World, Diaspora, Pan-Africanism, and Global Connections, Medina Thiam, Nana Osei Opare, and Jody Benjamin will discuss West Africa's rich global connections and diasporic ties. The panel on gender in West African history, past developments and future directions brings together Jacqueline Bethel Mogwe, Bright Alozie, and Kwame Otu to examine the evolving roles of gender in West African historical narratives. Our 4th panel on environment and the history of West Africa features Asan Sarr, Rebecca Wall, Robin Davignon, and Harmony O'Rourke. And that will provide insight into the intersections between environment and history in the region. Additionally, we are privileged to have a keynote address by Michael Gomez titled Political Space in West Africa, Interplay of Innovation and Integrity Over Time. So thank you for being here today and for your ongoing support of the Journal of West African History. Together, we have accomplished much, and together, we will continue to make strides in this vital field. Welcome again. Do enjoy our shared achievements, and please join me in welcoming the Dean of the College of Social Science, Dr. Brent Donnellan, who will say a few words of welcome. Brent. So it's not in your...
Yeah. Who's next after Carol? Or Mickey?
Paris next.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I am honored to be part of this opening session for the celebration of a decade of excellence at the Journal of West African History, or JWA, as I just learned. It's really energizing to see everybody gathered here this morning as they prepare for an outstanding program. And I do hope the activities and fellowship of the day provide for a wonderful celebration of the growth and impact of this landmark journal. I want to thank everybody who helped make today possible, including the journal staff and MSU staff, and especially my colleague, Dr. Wando Achebe. Wando is a brilliant scholar and a fantastic person, and she is your editor-in-chief, and today is a testament to her vision for the journal, so thank you. I also want to thank everybody who came out today, and especially those who traveled far from out of town. So welcome, or welcome back to the wonderful alumni to East Lansing and the Michigan State campus. We are so glad to have you back. I hope today helps to further strengthen and nurture community and provides for the kind of transformative experiences that happen when people gather in the same space, in the same place, to share ideas and ask important questions. As people, time is our most important resource. It is our most limited resource. And it's fantastic that everyone here gathered will give their gift of time to make today a very special event. So thank you. So I trust today will further illuminate the importance of West Africa to contemporary global issues and highlight the importance of interdisciplinary approaches to African studies and historical inquiry. I want to give a shout out to MSU's Department of History, which has long-standing strengths in African history. And I hope today's event also further helps to underscore MSU as an important hub for scholarship related to Africa. So welcome, thanks again for coming, and have a wonderful 10th anniversary conference. And now I will introduce my colleague and friend, Pero Dagbovi, who's going to give some opening remarks. He's a historian and the dean of the graduate school and executive vice president for graduate and postdoctoral studies. Did I get your title right? Hopefully. Oh, there it is. Vice provost and dean of the graduate school, Pero Dagbovi.
Wow, y'all fancy. Nice picture. I'm going to take my time, but not exceed the 2.5 minutes I've been allotted and reminded of. So on behalf of the Michigan State University Graduate School, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to Michigan State University for this wonderful conference that celebrates a decade of the Journal of West African History. In line with one of Michigan State University's core values, the graduate school has enjoyed collaborating with JWA since its launching. Generations of Africanist graduate students have benefited from rigorous hands-on work with the journal. With particular focus on West African culture and history, this conference promises to explore a wide range of important topics, linking the past, present, and future. The conference is, of course, bringing together a diverse group of scholars, including our MSU faculty and alumni. Based upon my perusal of the program, the presentations look fascinating, addressing historical methods, African diasporic trends, political histories, gender and sexuality, and the environment. Given MSU's long relationship and engagement with Africa, dating back to the presidency of John A. Hanna and earlier, it is only fitting to have this gathering here today in East Lansing, Michigan. Not only was MSU one of the first to create an African Studies Center that was founded way back in the day, more than 60 years ago, but the African History PhD program at Michigan State University has been highly ranked for decades. And I should note, and Dean Donnellan and Chair Stam know this, that the #1 ranking is right around the corner, and that it was taken away, how shall we call it, in an unjust manner. Indeed, the Journal of West African History in this conference belongs to a long tradition of Africanist research at Michigan State and, in fact, in the United States. So let me end by congratulating my good friend, sister, Associate Dean, and Professor Wando Achebe for her first-rate editorship of JWA, and also by applauding her editorial team for their steadfast work. May you all have a wonderful experience at this conference. Thank you very much.
What's that mean? Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. I think I'm the last thing between you and the interesting part of the day, so I will be brief with this. I'm Michael Stam. I'm the chairperson of the History Department, and I want to welcome you all to campus and to this conference celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Journal of West African History. It's nice to see some familiar faces who are back here in town, people out doing great things out there in the field, and it's nice to see so many new faces, people who have come to Michigan State University today for this August gathering and to engage in serious conversations about African history. African history has long been a signature strength of the MSU History Department. It has been at or near the top ranking for decades. It will soon be back at the top ranking if we can all do what we want to do. And this is the result of the research, teaching, and public outreach done by faculty and students. Faculty have been producing field-defining scholarship for decades, and the program has a long record of excellence in training the next generation of the professoriate. Indeed, you'll see that since 1967, more than 100 students have graduated from the PhD program. These are students from Africa, Europe, Latin America, and the United States. Some of them are here today, and many of them are out there as leaders in the field today. In addition to producing scholarship and training students, one of the other ways that scholars in this department have expanded the reputation of African history has been through founding journals. And that's what my colleague, Dr. Wando Achebe, did 10 years ago with the Journal of West African History, and that's what we're here to celebrate today. This publication has established itself as a flagship outlet in the field, and it continues the aspirations of the Department of History, the College of Social Science, and Michigan State University more generally of fostering academic excellence and producing better understandings of West African history. Under Dr. Achebe's foundational and guiding leadership, the JWA has become is expanding knowledge about one of the world's dynamic regions. And I want to just say in conclusion, we're here to celebrate 10 years of an accomplishment. That's a big deal. But I want to acknowledge how this 10 years of accomplishment is the result of every single article and every single issue coming out. And that's a lot of hard work on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis on the part of Dr. Achebe, the editorial board, and the staff. And it's wonderful today to be here to be able to acknowledge this 10 years of success. So I want you to join me in congratulating Dr. Achebe and everyone involved in the journal on their achievements. Congratulations. Thank you. So thank you all very much. I hope you have an excellent day with this wonderful set of panels. I will see you at the reception at Cole's house later in the evening. I can say with absolute confidence you will have a more interesting day than I will. But enjoy the day and have a good one. Thank you, everybody. Congratulations.
Hello, I'm Natalie Eidner, and I'm the journal's manager at Michigan State University Press. I'm honored to be here today to join in the celebration of what the Journal of West African History has accomplished in its first 10 volumes. Over 10 years ago, when this project was beginning to take shape, I was still relatively new in my career as a university press editor. I recall several initial planning meetings between the press and Dr. Achebe, and was inspired by her passion and unstoppable approach to achieving the mission she had for this journal. Its mission, its content, and even its logo and design. JWA was one of the first journals I ever helped to launch, so it was certainly a learning and growing experience for me. And it was motivating to work with a team so dedicated to its success, including the partnerships and support networks we were able to build across MSU's campus and beyond. It has been a pleasure to work with Dr. Achebe and her team over the years. One of our main missions as a university press is to teach students about scholarly publishing. So it has been wonderful to collaborate with so many of JWA's graduate assistants, sharing whatever knowledge I can with them as we collaborate to share whatever knowledge I can with them about the press's side of the journal publication process and learning new things from them in return. I've also enjoyed working with the fantastic group of associate editors and book review editors that contribute so much to JWA, as well as seeing the JWA mentorship program flourish. African studies is such an important subject area to both our book and journal programs at MSU Press, and to have an exemplary journal like JWA as part of our roster, to point to it as its record and its contribution to the field has been a great source of pride for our press. In celebration of the 10th anniversary, JWA is launching the 10 for 10 initiative to make key articles from the first 10 volumes free for the next 10 months. Ideas such as these are so encouraging as we work to think of new ways to equitably, accessibly, and sustainably share the JWA platform with writers, researchers, and readers throughout the world. It feels like just yesterday that we were helping JWA plan the launch conference, which celebrated the beginning of something new and exciting. And now the time has flown, and here we are again, excited about what's next. Thank you.
So I end up being the last person. It's okay, no problem. So my name is Awasar, and I'm Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at the African Studies Center here at MSU, and I'm representing Dr. Leo Zulu, who is the Director of the African Studies Center, and he's currently traveling in the continent, Zimbabwe more precisely. And he sends warm greetings and thank you for your presence with us here today. Indeed, we are very honored, distinguished guests, to have you with us today to celebrate an important milestone in the life of the Journal of West African History. It has been 10 years of solid, serious scholarship and invaluable contribution to the field of West African history. The founding editor-in-chief of the journal wrote in the first issue that, I quote, "In the vast sea of scholarly journals dedicated to African studies, there was a lacuna. No single journal dedicated to the study of West African history." So thank you, Dr. Achebe, for your leadership in filling up this gap. Thank you to the editorial board of the journal, the advisory board members, editors, and contributors. Without your collective efforts, we wouldn't be here today. We also thank all the people who are involved in organizing this conference. As a unit at MSU dedicated to the creation and dissemination of cutting-edge knowledge about Africa, Among other priorities, the African Studies Center is proud of the work you have done, and we are thrilled to be one of your fervent supporters. As an West African myself, I say thank you for a decade spent researching, writing, and documenting the lived experience of the West African people, a remarkable people, my people. Thank you. May the celebration be blessed and beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you to Dr. Wando Achebe, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of West African History, Dr. Brent Danilen, Dean of the College of Social Science, Dr. Pero Dagbovi, and Natalie Eidnia, Dr. Awasa, and Dr. Michael Stam for your opening remarks. Let's give it up one more time. At this point, I would like to invite our very first panel for the conference titled Archives, Source, and Methods for West African History. The chair for the panel, Dr. Dean Rebega. Sorry. Welcome. And the discussant, Dr. Trevor Getz. Panelist, Dr. David Glavsky, Dr. John Mugani, and Dr. Robin Chapdelaine. Hand everything over there.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to introduce this first panel for a number of reasons. Several people are old friends of mine, as well as we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And somebody does digital African studies. It's a very exciting panel on archive sources, methods for West African history. Our first speaker is Dr. David Glavsky of Harvard University. He is now Harvard, but of course he is from Michigan State University as a PhD student. He is an historian of 19th and 20th century West Africa with a focus on Senegal and Gambia and Guinea-Bissau and Guinea. Professor Glavsky's current book project, Borderlands, Popular Geographies, Mobility and Belonging in West Africa, examines the durability and adaptation of popular fluid geographies in West Africa, grounded in the borderland conceptions of space and place. Today, he'll be speaking on the sacred and everyday Ajami archives between Fouta Djallon and Dakar. No problem.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Dean, for the introduction. Thank you, Dr. Chebe, for inviting me to give this talk. In my application letter to MSU in 2012, I mentioned the incoming founding of JWA, and now I stand here presenting as a JWA author and MSU alum, so it all worked out, I guess. So today my talk is entitled The Sacred and the Everyday, Ajami Archives Between Fouta Djallon and Dakar. So in many parts of Africa, there are long traditions of writing in Arabic and African languages with Arabic script, which is known as Ajami. Ajami traditions exist across West Africa and are particularly prominent in Greater Senegambia and northern Nigeria. The use of the Arabic script to write West African languages has a long and vibrant history as well, dating back at least several centuries and continuing to the present. Michael Mumin has accounted for at least 80 and as many as 95 different African languages in which the Arabic script has been used historically. Today, I will explore the history of Pular Ajami in the Fouta Djallon region of Guinea, an area where the use of Ajami literature became common in the late 18th century, and whose popularization is most often associated with the religious leader Cherno Samba Mombea, who lived from about 1755 to 1852. This paper uses text collected from the Ghanaian immigrant community in Dakar, dating from 1963 until more recent decades, and collected in 2016 to demonstrate everyday uses of Ajami, as well as the use of Ajami poetry in recording the history of particular religious and political leaders. Both historically and in the contemporary period, Pular Ajami from Fouta Djallon encompasses a wide variety of themes and topics, My goal today is to highlight these two extremes, the sacred and the everyday. And I'm going to focus on the everyday because the sacred has really been more of a topic of scholarship in recent years. So while much public and scholarly discussion on Ajami writing focuses on Islamic knowledge, poetry, and other religious forms of writing, it has a wide variety of everyday uses, including public communication, business and administrative documentation, and private correspondence. Many of these different types of manuscripts are featured in the wider NEH Ajami project that I worked on from 2019 to 2022, and are discussed later in this talk. Until recently, the only access to Pular Ajami manuscripts was through archives like the Institut Fondamental d'Afrique Noire held at the Université Cheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, Senegal. However, recent projects like this one have digitally preserved Ajami manuscripts from different Pular dialects across West Africa. So as part of this project, Ajami literature and the expansion of literacy in Islam, the case of West Africa, I worked alongside a larger team to transcribe and translate Pular Ajami texts from Fouta Djallon and the Fulbe diaspora in Dakar. So they were transliterated and then translated into French and English. And because a lot of labor is obscured in these academic presentations, I did not have the time or the energy to translate all of these documents myself into multiple languages. I want to mention the work of my fellow translators. This was really a team effort. So the first of whom is Mohamedou Lamine Jallo, who is a native Pular speaker and instructor of Wolof at Boston University. Second, Dr. Abubakar Jallo, who is a biomedical research scientist who studied Ajami as a member of the Ghanaian diaspora in Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and then eventually in the United States. And then Boubacar Biro Jallo, a Pular language instructor based in Dakar, who has worked in international development. This work was supervised by Dr. Fallou Ngom, an award-winning pioneering linguistic anthropologist of Ajami texts in Senegambia, and the documents were housed online through BU's African Studies Center. Without Fallou's help, and with that of our Pular team leader, MSU Professor Emeritus David Robinson, this wider work would have been impossible. So had I not come to MSU 11 years ago, I certainly wouldn't be doing this because I feel like I've moved into all of these spaces. So though this Ajami project encompassed a variety of texts with both religious and secular purposes, today I want to really talk about the sort of everyday. So many of these these things are all available online. So if you Google NEH Ajami, you can find all of the religious poetry, and it's really interesting and great, and you can read the translations. So while religious texts are central to most studies of Ajami writing, I want to talk today about the everyday uses of Ajami to record meeting minutes, write letters back and forth, and keep accounting records. So the Pular Ajami tradition in Fouta Djallon has spread outside of the region as well as its people have spread outside of its region, serving to connect Fulbe people who have left the region to their ancestral homes. The Senegalese capital of Dakar is home to a large community, hundreds of thousands of Ghanaian immigrants, and BU's African Ajami Library, the predecessor to this project, houses more than 1,200 pages of Pular Ajami materials collected from Ghanaian migrant communities in Dakar. It includes descriptions of money transfers, this one, which is titled Neldugo Mbudi, which literally translates as to send money, a shopkeeper's accounting notebook, notes and letters from religious organizations, and business records relating to transportation. These sources demonstrate that the use of Pular Ajami among Fulbe communities from Fouta Djallon and their diaspora is vibrant in the 21st century and must be understood in historical and contemporary context alongside writing for religious purposes. And so much of this writing is contained in the home. It's not things that are necessarily publicly available. You're not seeing publications and things like that. So these are things that provide new windows into more recent periods of West African history. So a set of letters listed in the NEH Ajami project as enhancing relationships, or in Pular Jokore Endang, which literally translates as the ties of mother's milk, primarily consists of dialogue between communities in Fouta Djallon and the Ghanaian expatriate communities in Dakar. These letters connect people from specific villages or districts in Guinea with the diaspora from these communities in and around Dakar. The concerns of these letters are often quite basic. This one, written in November 1997, invites people to the store of El Hajj Mohamedou Bailo Safa in Dakar to inform them about the work the diaspora of PITA is doing for their community. They ask communities to contribute up to 2 bags of cement and 2 metal sheets to facilitate this work. These letters represent the continuation of ties between those who have left, temporarily or permanently, and those who have stayed. Other letters indicate to us how both diasporas and the ties between them across international borders. In this letter sent from Paris to Dakar, dated December 13th, 1993, the letter writer indicates to the receiver that he received their letter and acknowledged, "I know that you also worry too much about my unemployment. When I have a small amount of resources, I'll send it so that you can help me in that matter discussed previously. But right now, it is rare to see someone going to Dakar. As soon as I have some money, I'll send it to you via postal services. I send greetings to Lady A and the children. I did not forget your fabric. It's because people do not like to carry heavy luggage. Help me. The letter writer then passes along greetings from others in Paris from the Ghanaian expatriate community, further signifying the way Ajami texts continued these bonds of belonging. Other letters send congratulations for the arrival of a new baby and compliment someone on doing, quote, an excellent job during his naming ceremony. Marriage and other social occasions are a common theme throughout many of these letters, really providing new sources for our study of social history in recent decades. In one example, this one here, a letter discusses the news of impending marriages and dowries and requests for sugar to help celebrate the breaking of the fast during Ramadan. Another letter from 1996 is from a father whose daughter has just married and moved into a new community. He writes to her neighbor, whom he already knew, and says, "It is Allah who has entrusted her to you. He is the one who sent her to your home next to you. You know now that children from Gongore lack discipline. So I implore you to look after her. Let her know she is your daughter, if you please. Do not let her misbehave before her husband and neighbors, which will bring shame to us, if you please. I am truly very happy to learn she is at your home, that God took her there. This is what I wanted to say to you." Letters like this provide a source of information on everyday life, not always accessible in other forms of written documentation. Sometimes they display family quarrels. In this letter, a person writes to a friend to inform him of his older sister's wedding. His brother had written a letter that only arrived after the wedding, where he rejected the marriage because the man was, quote, a drunkard. But the letter assures the brother, he said he has completely stopped drinking. Since it is your parents who have authorized the marriage, please accept their decision and thank them warmly. In another case, the writer informs the reader that 200,000 francs were taken from their money for a wedding, and they didn't have time to ask in advance. They state, "I realized that if I had not done it, it would have been a disgrace to the family. All of your maternal siblings wore outfits of the same fabric." In these sentences, we can see hints of a larger family dynamic. The physically absent supplier of money, who is only told about the expenses after the fact, the celebration of the wedding, the visual of the siblings with matching outfits, and the need for the family to put on a societally appropriate wedding. Forms of non-state justice were also dealt with in the various Ajami documents we collected. In this 1994 letter from the community of Pita in Guinea, Fujajalan, representatives of all 12 sub-prefectures met to discuss the case of a man for anonymity's sake listed as EO. EO's major crime was to have unjustly and intentionally shot another member of the community. However, that was not the only crime that concerned the letter writers. I would have thought that shooting someone would have been enough. Moreover, during the holiday of Tabaski, during the Eid prayer, EO refused to sit at his reserved place. He sat on the side and demanded that the minbar, the location from where the imam delivers his sermon, be moved before him. Then the minbar was moved to the side, which prevented many people from doing their Eid prayers there. While the murder of another seems sufficient, the letter writer wanted to make sure that the reader understood the other religious crimes of the now outcast man. The phrasing of the deliberations and the punishment is noteworthy, and that's what you can see here. Therefore, the whole community of Pita, consisting of the 12 subdivisions, has discussed and unanimously agreed that we no longer want EO. Let no one invite him to any event. He should no longer attend any community meeting in all of Pita. Therefore, anyone who invites him to a ceremony or attends a ceremony in his presence will be regarded as someone who is not from the community of Pita, be they young, adult, man, or woman. Rather than any sort of formal judicial punishment, this letter demonstrates how social forms of justice were meted out by communities. Many other Ajami documents represent everyday uses, like lists and receipts. Well before starting this project, I can recall conversations and observations of many shopkeepers in southern Senegal and in neighboring areas who recorded their sales in Ajami rather than in French, particularly among those who attended Quranic rather than colonial government schools. One of the Ajami lists seen here, collected for the project, was wedding expenses, including fabric, meat, chairs, a tarp, and a generator rented for the festivities. In the world of West African history, where written materials documenting everyday life are often scarce as archival sources, these sorts of materials can tell us how communities communicated, how they celebrated joyous moments, and the care they took of each other. So, in recent decades, many states have sought to encourage alphabetization and literacy in the Latin script. and the 1966 Bamako Conference set out to formalize the writing of Pular in Latin script. Despite this, Ajami maintains a prominent place in many Pular-speaking communities. The ignoring of Ajami texts has often resulted in historical narratives that do not reflect the perspectives of the communities being discussed. And in fact, literacy in Ajami was more present than literacy in official languages like French, English, and Portuguese until very, very recently. Because Ajami writing often focuses on private spaces, it's often difficult for outsiders to understand its ubiquity. Even statistics by national governments regarding literacy in West Africa ignore individuals who are literate, but are literate in Ajami, whether Wolof, Pular, Hausa, or other languages, by assessing only knowledges of European languages in Latin script. Ajami writing has been a part of Pular-speaking communities for more than 200 years, ranging from Fouta Toro in northern Senegal and Mauritania to Fouta Djallon in Guinea, and then all the way as far east as Adamawa in Cameroon. Moreover, Ajami serves as a linkage between Fulbe communities that may otherwise be spread around countries whose official languages include French, English, Portuguese, and Hassaniya Arabic. Thus, Ajami writing crosses national linguistic boundaries, connecting speakers of various Pular dialects over wide distances. So, as I wrap up, in this talk, I've sought to highlight these everyday uses of Pular Ajami with the religious poetry that's often treated as the larger Ajami norm. And if you want to see, there's a lot of that poetry available online through this NEH project. My hope is that these sources will open new possibilities for thinking about West African Islamic archives in previous centuries, but also in recent decades. These archives can provide us an inside view of how people wrote to one another, but also records of how they met and celebrated. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Glasky. And I do encourage you to go to matrix.msu.edu. There's lots of Ajami projects that you can look at. Please write down your questions and keep them to the end. We're going to have a discussant, and then we'll have questions then that you can ask. Next, we'll have John Magami, also from Harvard University. Dr. Magami is the Director of African Language Program in the Department of African and African American Studies. He is a linguist specializing in African languages and is a professor of practice of African languages and culture. Dr. Magami is the author of The Story of Swahili, among many other works. Today is going to talk to us about machine learning and artificial intelligence for African languages, the pivot, and the inflection. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and also, first of all, to my very old and dear friend, Professor Nondo Achebe. I haven't seen her for many years, but I always see her far away at ASA, and I would be taken off in other directions. And so I would like to very much appreciate that and the forbearance about very difficult time doing all this, so that I wasn't able to answer things very fast as they were needed. But I'm glad to be here. Very glad, because this is a place I see familiar people. I see Professor Walter Hawthorne. We were with him for many years, even worked together once, and then he came out here. And of course, I see people I've been with here in school and so on. Jody, I see you, and of course. So I'm at home, and therefore, if anything doesn't work, they'll tell you I'm a good person. The first thing is to recognize that what I'm talking about is really funded by a presidential research accelerator fund at Harvard, named the Motsepe Fund. And that has enabled us to actually do some good work. My particular interest is, you can read that paragraph over there, but it's a paragraph that requires me to be sitting with a team of people. So we've been dealing with languages, and the way we have been dealing with them is asking questions about how on earth we are sitting the way we are without actually looking at what's really happening to languages. I am a language person, and therefore, of course, I see it. Now, I must first of all then say, to present the credentials that I have, is that I've been at Harvard for a couple of decades, and we have been able to teach 47 languages. Right now, as we speak, we have 16 being taught in about 36 different classrooms. It's a good enterprise. And the question has always been, why do you do this? And the only place I've ever been to in this country that, and anywhere, even in Africa, that understood the importance of African languages in African studies was a place where I went and found the faculty actually telling me that. Whereas when I was in other schools before, especially at Stanford, I would say African languages are vital and all the other stuff. They would be very cordial and then tell me the students are going to have one quarter, which is 9 weeks of languages, and then they'll go do interesting things like build bridges and do other things. And so I came to a school that I was saying this is vital. And so in the place, it's very easy to deal with it. No matter what anybody says about its success, it's not about the director of the language program. It is that the faculty actually say very good things. I walk around there and I find people coming, talking to me very fast, telling me that I speak 47 languages and that it is a wonderful thing. But it's faculty who say, I regret I didn't take an African language, go and study one. Now, these languages here, and the pie charts and all the other stuff, how do you offer these languages? Very simple point. We don't offer them because you just want to do them. They have to be curricular and they have to be dealing with intellectual sort of activity that we have in the university. Because we don't want to say sometimes classes have come and filled up with people and they tell me we are here, we want us to learn Afrikaans. And I ask them, okay, so why do you want to learn Afrikaans? They say, no, we want it taught in the university. We don't want to learn it. And of course, you chase those ones away and all the other stuff. But after the politics, what then we deal with is that this is teaching languages with a very different style of learning. The style is called learning languages, the African style. So there's a style out there that is actually viable and actually works. And the style is really basically based on the idea that languages, the way I tell everybody is that the way you learn languages are the epiphenomenon. Learning languages, speaking them, is the epiphenomenon of social engagement. And not just social engagement that you actually find everywhere. It is actually the kind of Ubuntu social engagement, meaning it is to see and hear people, that is to speak language. It's not to just look right through them, which is what I've discovered to be the case in all our studies. So that here we have to say, you learn a language by doing actual things. Now, how do we learn them in school? Of course, we learn them in school because then we prepare for the actual place. But the idea is that when you want to learn a language, the best thing is to be involved in a thing. You're not leading, you're actually participating in it. I could give you examples, but I think people here are really quite knowledgeable of these things. And so all I'll say is that languages are learned because you're making connections with people. And when grammar becomes impossible, then you come and we'll tell you why the grammar is behaving the way it is. I wouldn't come by to MSU without remembering my friend David Dwyer, who was really very close to me. And though he was senior to me, he was always very, very helpful. And he talked about the history of teaching language. I just want to mention that this history here, these were the times people were asking, how do we teach African languages when there are so many? And so he had come up with a formulation of doing it, because everybody says, how do we learn them? Where do we learn them? And so on. And he had a pretty good story here, although I found it really strange from when I was with him over there, talking about the way to deal with all of them. And his big issue was actually this list here, the list of 82 African languages. These are the big ones. So if you have people here, you would actually say the big languages spoken here. About 70 to 80 languages, last time I looked, had 1 million speakers plus. All the others, if we have 2,000, we say, then all the others, 1,900 and something, would actually, all of them be having less than 1 million people, and some have just a small score of people. And so there is, how do you teach languages if this is the thing you're given? Fortunately, this is the first thing they asked me when I go to Harvard, and I just said, we can teach all of them. I didn't know that actually people say things and people write them in the New York Times. So all of a sudden, I was supposed to be able to teach 2,000. I said I would, but the point is that these languages, big ones, are the ones that David suggested people learn. But you don't look for language learning opportunities by language sizes. It's by issues. So if Ebola shows up, that little language that is actually out there is the most important. if it's a big thing, if the bombings in Nairobi, for instance, when we were bombed out there, and the GIS came there, they were not understanding Swahili, and people were trying to go all over that place that was bombed. People are speaking Swahili. Now, if you're in that place, even when you're the police, even if you're the soldier, as you hear people are saying something, you would repeat it and you know what it means because you're learning it in the real situation. I wouldn't belabor that very much, but the idea of learning a language then is that when a student comes and says, here are these languages, here is a map, which language is best for me, the thing I always tell them is either toss a coin or just learn, just take one of them. Because what we do in the language program, at least I try to emphasize it, is that you don't learn a language, you learn how to learn them. And how to learn them is, first of all, see an African and hear them, not just look like through them and feel very, when you're congratulated that you actually did a good job, keep on doing things and you'll be embraced by these places, and then you'll have a problem getting rid of them because you came and talked their language and other things. Now, I wanted to very briefly point out about a quarter century ago, that is the year 2000, there was this meeting that I didn't go to, but I really regretted it because it was wonderful, that it was called the Sahara meeting, where everybody went there and they were writers and scholars. And as they were walking, they flew in, and as they were talking in the Horn of Africa, they were in Eritrea, they started talking about languages and what they mean and how they are neglected and so on. So these are just lines to show you what was a preamble to the kinds of things they were actually going to talk about. And they said things like when they went to present poetry and literature out there in the world, everybody stood up in the podium and spoke their language. And they, from Ghana, they spoke English. From Senegal, they spoke French. From other places, everybody just kept on speaking this language, so that the audience there just asked them, don't you have your own languages? And I remember Anyidoho would actually say they left there fairly embarrassed. Now, that's one thing. So why were they speaking these languages out there? And then you look at, but there was one exception, somebody called Abdulatif Abdallah, who is in England, a very good scholar of Swahili studies, and he's the one who did this poetry in Swahili. And then everybody, of course, felt like they had been bailed out. But in the end, that conference, you might have seen it. I'll just put these three things here. The kinds of statements being done there at the declaration. A declaration, I take, is either made by kings or people who are fed up, who are just saying, this is it, this is the way the world is going to be. So here, they're saying African languages must take the duty, the responsibility, and the challenge of speaking for the continent. And when I looked at this, I studied them and I look at them, I wonder, what is wrong? What are the interrogative questions that actually raise this as an answer? What is making us say the duty and responsibility? I would think that when you look at Africa, all of it is working really well with our languages and all that. And basically we're engaging each other. When the constitution is written, it doesn't mean that that constitution is actually delivered in English, it's actually deliberated in other languages and so on. So this is one thing that actually says we talk, but the issue here for me is the visibility and invisibility of Africans. And when they are talking, they don't see like they've been addressing or being addressed properly by other places. Now, these are just pictures to show you. These are kings of Africa. They speak those languages. I was told they can stop Boko Haram at a moment if they were just given the chance to talk. I was in Cameroon, and it was interesting. Cameroon, by the way, told me that I went to ask them, after Nigeria, you're the next group that has 300 languages. Nigeria has 400, 500 number. And they kept quiet, very dignified, and looked at each other, and then looked at me and told me, where are they? And then I discovered actually these are languages that are being counted by linguists and other people. And so I would like to just say that there is what you call language work and the work of language. And if it doesn't make the nuance properly, then you have to go to religion and say, what is the difference between church work and the work of the church? Church work, they're writing sermons, they're basically trying to build churches, they're doing all these things. The work of the church is to go look for orphans, widows, take care of business and so on. And so there is a difference in language if you actually figure it out in the same sense and say, so this kind of talk here, we're talking about how talking about HIV/AIDS had to really be done in African language, and this is what Professor Lugala, the late Professor Lugala, was actually showing over there. And so all these are then other details of it. This is a conference where we are talking about languages, and we spend time in the law school. Why the law school? Because you have to go to places where the actual language question is. The language question is not between people who are writers saying, I will write in this language or write in the other. Gugu Thiongo is a very good friend of mine. I revere him completely. So did Achebe, who was a teacher of Thiongo and so on. But the real question is not those. The question is, go to courtrooms and see places that don't have juries. And you see languages being talked over there. And you'll see the kinds of issues that languages actually hold. I have this, well, it has been said that only 3% of the world of Africa's cases are really dealt with in court. Others are 97% are alternative court places. I have been involved in one in Nairobi, where I went there and people Maasai and Kikuyu and whatever, they are trying to negotiate land, and that was sold. And it was amazing to just see what our languages do. So in the end, our languages speak for Africa. My main thing that I wanted to actually show you, it's not all this technology, because technology is there and you can always see it, is perhaps the idea of I would like you to, is there a way I can get out of this? And
Do you want the link?
yeah, I want to actually just go and yeah, page behind this. Can you? I just want to reflect it. Okay, so can we return it? Can everybody see this? Oh, it can be seen. So my point is that basically what I wanted to do, it was working in my room until this morning. Till this morning when I decided to refresh everything, and Hugging's face refused to work. What I was supposed to do here when I came here is to actually speak, and then these languages, English, Kikuyu, Swahili, Somali, Luo, would actually be writing what I'm actually saying, so that it's actually in sequence, in series. So if we just look at it, this is what would actually be happening. Easier than ever to stay updated on what's going on around us, from disasters to significant political developments. Keeping up with breaking news is an integral part of our daily life routine. Thanks to advancements, getting instant updates has become incredibly convenient. So it was not what I was saying that was important. It is that everything that, so I'm speaking, and this is just anything we can take it from the newspapers. I'm speaking over there. It is actually transcribing what I'm saying, because my accent could be funny to somebody. And then there is the Kikuyu is translating it, Luo is doing it, Somali is doing it. When you look at those things, then what you'll see is that the way that it's actually working. So you can also see this. So this is basically showing the quality of the kinds of languages. So if you train these languages, these are the scores. If you have scores like this, it is meaning that your language is actually being heard, sometimes even probably heading to being superhuman. What can we do when we start lecturing and people hear us in their own languages and they respond in their languages and we actually have to respond? This will be the solution of the language question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Magami. And it's really exciting so far. I mean, we really have that connection of the everydayness of language, which connects well with our final speaker, Dr. Robin Chapdelaine from Stanford University. Robin Chapdelaine's research focuses on women's, gender, and African history with an emphasis on child slavery and human trafficking. She is the author of The Persistence of Slavery and Economic History of Child Trafficking in Nigeria, and is currently working on her next book, Embrace Black Joy, How Emphatic Teaching Empowers All Students. This text aims to be a pedagogical tool that assists educators to embrace Black joy as a worthy topic of inquiry in the classroom and one that benefits all. She will be talking to us today about reimagining the African times through artificial intelligence in 19th century. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and to see all of you up early with us. It's a pleasure to be in physical proximity to the JWA team. I've worked with them several times over the years, either as an author or reviewer, and I have to say it is quite the pleasure to be in your presence. So thank you for having me, and thank you for holding this conference. So our project, which Trevor is part of at Stanford, is really exciting, not just for the scholars, but for the students, the PhD students, and the undergraduates. What I'm going to talk about today will cover an overview of what we're doing, the core propositions, the methodology and implementation, an analysis of the preliminary results, and then I will just conclude with perhaps some future ideas about what we can do with the project. So, artificial intelligence holds the promise of transformative advances that could enhance the lives of people across the globe. However, the current AI landscape is dominated by a few centralized corporations, which often reproduces the exclusions historically marginalized populations have faced with earlier digital media technology. This centralized model risks perpetuating systemic biases and further alienating these communities. By addressing these exclusions, we can create a more equitable future for AI, ensuring that individuals and communities in Africa are not only adequately represented, but also actively benefiting from the technological advancements. The Center for African Studies, in partnership with Stanford University's Computer Science Lam Lab, is pioneering efforts to address these issues by feeding digitized historical documents into a decentralized large language model as an alternative to mainstream models like ChatGPT. The initial corpus for this endeavor is the African Times, a newspaper that primarily features correspondence from interlocutors in West Africa, London, and the Caribbean. This LLM-based tool aims to serve as a thought partner for exploring the sentiments and perspectives of communities often overlooked in historical narratives. This essay seeks to confront the limitations of existing AI tools that predominantly reflect Western white male perspectives. By investing in how AI can assist researchers, students, and communities in accessing historical materials, the project aspires to democratize knowledge and amplify marginalized voices. So, just want to show you an image of the newspaper we're talking about. The intersection of knowledge and power is critical in discussions about AI. Mainstream AI systems, particularly those developed by tech giants like Google and Meta, tend to perpetuate embedded biases in their knowledge bases. This results in the continued underrepresentation of historically marginalized communities. This project interrogates whether LLM-based tools can offer a more authentic and meaningful understanding of the past by leveraging the vast corpora of materials, including oral histories, written documents, and community-produced records. By focusing on the African times, the project emphasizes the need for a more inclusive narrative. Historically, African perspectives have been sidelined in the construction of global history, and this initiative aims to rectify that imbalance as one part of its goal. So the core proposition is that LLM-based tools can enhance the authenticity and accuracy of historical narratives in 4 significant ways, with a couple of caveats. Rapid data collection. AI can effectively search and compile extensive data sets, enabling researchers to access a wealth of information quickly. Deep reading of sources. AI tools can assist in analyzing sources for context, bias, and reference, enhancing our understanding of historical texts. This will require critical reading of the corpus, and through student analysis in the classroom, it is possible to achieve a more nuanced interpretation, so users can pose questions and receive answers that align with perspectives of the original authors, but also recognize that a more nuanced understanding of historical narratives requires recognition of the historical context, common biases of the prevailing historical moment, and take into consideration other historical sources. So it's one part of reconstructing history, that is using this AI tool. Amplify marginal voices is another aim connected to our core proposition. And that means users can pose questions and receive answers that align with perspectives of the original authors. Oh, I'm sorry, that's repeating myself. So amplifying marginalized voices. The tools can help surface the voices of historically marginalized individuals and communities, ensuring a richer and more diverse historical discourse. So in this context, we identify, or students might identify, what could be missing from the source, acknowledge prevailing biases, note possible historical omissions, etc. Digitizing these kinds of materials is crucial for preserving African heritage, enhancing accessibility for students and scholars, and empowering communities. Creating a digitized OCR collection of resources has the potential of capturing the socio-political, economic, and cultural narratives of different time periods in Africa. Because the risk of decay and loss associated with physical copies, particularly in regions with limited resources for preservation, digitization, plus OCR technology, ensures that the corpus remains available. To validate this hypothesis, the project aims to develop a tool that is accessible to researchers, especially those located in African countries, students, and community members. I think that what's really important for the team, or at least us as historians, is not just that the computer science students have a terrific opportunity to load the material, evaluate it, etc. But at the end of the day, what's most important about making this material accessible? And we believe it truly is scholars on the continent, ensuring that they have the technology not just to access, but also to manipulate what we fed into the program. And that's an issue at hand, but it's certainly something that we hope to see resolved. So the project has undertaken several innovative steps to realize its objectives. The OCR technology, the AI tool has been utilized to convert PDFs of the African Times into readable, searchable text, making the content more accessible. Human verification, so with the use of students, with the use of student assistants, they error check the processes. They participate to the oversight of what's been implemented, and they enhance this accuracy of the converted text. And with regards to the accessibility, both the original and converted texts are made available online, ensuring broad user access and encouraging engagement with the materials. There is also now a search engine as part of the tool The search engine has been developed to enable users to query the text effectively, allowing for targeted exploration of historical context. And there's quite an amazing feature where you can ask it a question, you know, give me a report on palm tree production from year such and such to such and such, and it will deliver quite an informative factual essay on that particular topic. And most of it's pretty good. There are some elements that need a little fixing, but that's the great part of the tool, is that it can deliver information. And for me, I was telling Trevor, I think one exciting thing in terms of pedagogy is telling the students, ask it a historical question, evaluate the outcomes, and try to fix what may not be right, right? So again, emphasizing the fact that you'll get a lot of accurate stuff, but you have to be aware that that may not be all of the story. So in terms of contextual information, the project incorporates contextual articles and chapters from UNESCO's Global History of Africa, providing users with essential background information to enrich their understanding. There are LLM assisted reports, and I just spoke to that. The tool that we are using is called Storm, and it generates reports in response to user inquiries with comparative, or comparatively, it could be seen as, you know, something like what Wikipedia might produce for a particular topic, ChatGPT and UNESCO. Additionally, the project actively works on mitigating AI hallucinations through a verification system and aims to instill scholarly thinking within the LLM by teaching key historical concepts such as continuity, change over time, significance, causation, sourcing, and context. So the analysis of the results, preliminary results indicate that Storm plus Africa Times can generate analyses that authentically reflect the arguments and perspectives of their African Times authors. Although the generated content may exhibit biases and inaccuracies, it often effectively cites original articles, enhancing its credibility for informed researchers. This capacity for citation is crucial for the academic rigor and integrity. However, the complexity of the outputs may pose challenges for students and community members who might find the nuanced arguments difficult to navigate. This suggests a need for user-friendly interfaces and supportive resources to help these groups effectively engage with the material. This tool could increase accessibility for students, scholars, and community members in the following ways. Educational resources, which would emphasize the importance of the sources for academic research, offer insights into various disciplines such as history, sociology, and political science, among others. Global access, digital formats can be accessed from anywhere in the world, breaking down geographical barriers for researchers. Interdisciplinary studies encourage the use of these materials in diverse fields, fostering a richer understanding of African histories and contexts. This tool also has the potential to empower local communities in the following way. When I say local communities, I mean communities on the continent. Cultural identity, which they could engage in discussing how these tools inform accurately about their historical past or challenge some of the biases that come through. This could increase community engagement by participating in some of these discussions. And then also perhaps encourage local development with regards to gathering resources to not only digitizing historical documents on the continent, but also in doing so by preserving these historical documents. Finally, just to emphasize or reemphasize that prioritizing projects that bridge the digital gap promises to provide and increase technology access, digital literacy, and enhance collaborative efforts. So in conclusion, this project represents a promising endeavor to rethink historical narratives through the lens of AI and using students, or by using students, researchers, and community members to fact check outcomes. By prioritizing marginalized voices and fostering an inclusive approach to knowledge production, it challenges the prevailing biases inherent in mainstream AI systems. The project's emphasis on accessibility, human oversight, and community engagement underscores its potential to transform how history is understood and represented. As the project evolves, continued exploration and iteration on the tool's capabilities will be essential to ensure it meets the diverse needs of its user base. Ultimately, this initiative exemplifies the potential of AI not only to enhance historical scholarship, but also to empower communities by making their histories more accessible and meaningful. By addressing the historical exclusions of AI, we can pave a way for a more equitable future that honors and uplifts diverse narratives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chaplain. I can't tell you how important it is for us to shift the language models for AI, and this is just not a promising project, but a critical project. It's something that has to be done. With that said, I'm going to introduce my old friend, Dr. Trevor Getz, who is going to be our discussant today. He is a professor of African and World History at San Francisco State University. Take it away. Do you want to come up here? You can. Why don't you do it there, and then you can have kind of a discussion. I can turn. Oh, come up there. You've got to follow the rules. Come on up here.
I always follow the professor's rules. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I've been privileged to be an editor on the journal with the editorial team for the past few years, and it's really been amazing. And certainly, I think that these papers reflect the vision of innovation and openness of the founders of our field, those folks who started universities in Africa in the 60s and 70s upon independence, and of Professor Chebe for starting this journal. It's sort of an homage to the journal in some ways. That said, we always ask questions, right? We ask lots of questions. I mean, African history has been very open to innovation, but at the same time, we don't go raiding other fields for their data. We have to learn how to deal with the whole package of ethics and methods and theory that comes with this kind of innovation. So I think about innovation and technology as I think about these three papers. And I want to focus on a couple of questions that come to mind when we think in these terms. The first is, I don't know if anybody's read Asimoglu and Johnson's new book on the 1,000-year struggle over technology and prosperity. But it's a great book that asks the question, who benefits from technological change? And of course, it comes up to, it looks at the Industrial Revolution and its inequalities, and it looks at automation in the 1950s, and of course it comes up to the modern day and AI and machine learning, and it asks the same sorts of questions there about who is benefiting and who can benefit. Secondly, there's a focus I think that we should take on user innovation. The people who use Ajami script or the African Times or languages that they adopt or these new technologies that we're talking about and digitization of things, they are innovators as well. They're not just passive recipients. And finally, I think we have to really think about unintended consequences, right? And that's not only when we're looking at the history of technologies, but also when we're looking at the technologies that we're using today. So let me start with who benefits. And my West African scholarliness is at war with my California informality. I'm going to use first names. I hope you don't mind. So David's paper focuses on these Ajami sources that tell us about the everyday, topics that are often dropped out or difficult to view because they're not created intentionally as historical sources, but which makes them, of course, rich for interpretation. And I'm really, impressed by how they can tell us about diasporic bonds or social innovations, relationships, family dynamics, community justice. The one thing I would say is that there are letters in my family that I probably wouldn't share with a researcher about those things, which is really interesting for me. The question about what benefits do the people who share these resources with the scholars, what do they perceive? Why are they doing it? Why are they choosing to do it? There are letters I would happily share, by the way. There are just some that I wouldn't, especially my uncle. That's a different story. So for Robin's presentation, I am of the party that says that we all worry about AI. I'm of the party that says we can't sit out AI and just let NVIDIA and Google run it and be in charge and do things. Like, we have to interact with them. And I absolutely see the argument that LLM supported interactions with things like the African Times can be an amazing challenge to that monopoly that otherwise does continue the same inequalities in who gets to produce knowledge. My questions here are, first, how do you make sure it's really accessible? I mean, for one thing, we have to think economically about the costs of these things and who's going to pay to keep it going. I mean, hopefully Stanford forever, they have the money, but who knows? But so that it can be accessible. Secondly, who gets to control the corpus, right? I mean, at this point, this is a question, especially if we get a lot of corpora like this that are in sort of independent agents like this, who gets to control it? Who owns the African Times today, right? Do we find the descendants of Ferdinand Fitzgerald, the original editor? I mean, I'm sure they're out there somewhere, but I doubt that that's the right way. Is it a community of people? This is an important question. And thirdly, and oppositely, I'm all for open access. I want people to use it, but having used the system a bit, it's easy to use it irresponsibly. It is biased. It is especially biased because it's a lot of coastal people writing about people in the interior, right? I mean, it's not necessarily Europeans about Africans, but there's a lot of bias. So how do we make sure? Let me tell you, if you trace your roots to Dahomey, you won't necessarily like what people are saying who are writing from Lagos or such in this period. So those questions. John, I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous that you're at a place like Harvard that's convinced of the importance and role of African languages. My question for you is simply, so this tool that you are building, how do you disseminate it, right? How do you get it into the hands of people who owns it and who pays for it or profits from it? Because it's an invaluable tool. I think it's really important work, but there again, who benefits is a question. Second question, and I'll go fast because somebody told me nobody minds if discussants are short. So user innovation. So again, looking at Ajami as a technology, which is amazing, I'm really interested in its selections and journeys, its transmissions and transactions, the process by which it finds its way into IFAN. I mean, these fantastic places, the Endangered Archives Program, the African Ajami Library and such. And I'm really interested in the fact that it allows us to see through colonial narratives and often elite narratives in Arabic as well. But nobody knew there was going to be this afterlife in scholarly hands. And so scholars now as users are innovating and using these sources in new ways. I guess there's not a question there. It's more of a comment. The African Times was also innovative as a newspaper in its origin. It was a newspaper friendly to Africans, published at first by subscription from mostly white British people, but then taken over by its users, taken over by Africans after a dispute with the sort of original producers, the African Aid Society. And so the new newspaper then came to include, had to pay for itself. It came to include a lot of advertising. It came to include, it tried to make itself a newspaper of business for Africans as well. And now again, we want to use it to read for social history, right? Which is not necessarily the purpose for which it was originally created. So how much innovation do we have to have in how we use it to read against the grain? And then finally, John, in terms of language change, here's my user innovation question. Does putting a system, putting a language into a machine learning system concretize it so that you can't innovate with it anymore? And I don't know, the answer may be no, but I just wonder whether at that point, what you do is you say, these are the translations, and the language kind of stops changing. I've been wondering about this a lot with all kinds of languages, whether the models, the machine learning models can adapt to the way that people are changing how they use and work with language, or whether it kind of freezes it in place somehow. And that ties in then, that's also an unintended consequence. So I have the same unintended consequence question about LLMs, about machine learning with languages. But David, for you as an unintended consequence, I'm more interested in the historical question of the unintended consequence of Ajami being produced for scholarly, for sacred texts, and then being adapted to the secular. So somebody created, or folks created this language largely so that it could be used to read the Quran and such, and then it gets adapted to secular uses, which are really very different. So what happens, and what do you see when that turn happens? And then finally, for Robin, the unintended consequence that we have to worry about is that folks will see the African Times as see the LLM as the expert in answering a question. And it's not, right? I mean, that's what you've discovered, what we've discovered. It's a great tool for smart people who already know something about the period. It can do all kinds of things for them. But otherwise, it has the capacity, if it's seen as the expert, to reproduce those mistakes and make them kind of like public. So what do we do about that? In short, and I'll finish up right now, I do believe that African historians, that we've led the way in thinking about sources and methods, and we need to continue to do so, to be innovative, but always thinking about the ethics, the theory, the method, and the whole complexity around it. And I will finish there.
Well, before we move to questions, I was wondering, Trevor asked two great questions of all of you. Who benefits and what are the unintended consequences of what you're doing? If you'd like to address those first before we open up to the general audience. Sure. Questions.
I think that it's really important to recognize that the importance of African history and the importance of African studies as a whole, part of that is ensuring that Indigenous voices are understood in their own terms historically and contemporarily as best as possible. And so I agree that there's a danger in using a tool like this. It's essential, I think, that, you know, in spaces where we do have control, because we don't really have complete control, but I think it's essential to present the tool as one that is problematic, but that has a lot of potential. So in terms of who benefits, I think there are a couple of different components to that. I think that there are possibilities for local Indigenous communities and researchers to benefit. I think in terms of education, I believe that students can use it as a tool to learn how biases can get concretized through print media and through the assistance with, you know, more seasoned researchers and historians can be led through processes which makes you think, how can I double, or how can I fact check this? How can I identify that this is biased in a way that could be harmful? So those are a couple of ways I think that people can benefit if the tool is used properly.
John?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and thank you for even having something to say, because I didn't send this thing quite early. But so for me, everything I'm doing, I'm using, my base is in Kenya, is in Nairobi. It is Kenyans who are actually collecting. We are doing the data together and all that stuff. The questions of who is it going to benefit? The first thing we are asking, and I'm working also with people in Masakana in South Africa. They're much more vibrant in what they were doing, but I took the occasion to actually develop a system that we'll actually develop ourselves. So one of the things we're worried about, who benefits, is if ChatGPT stays the way it is, its pivot is English. And so we decided we have to find one that is African, meaning if you speak your language, we can subvert that system of not just using this particular pivot we've actually been given for various reasons. In South Africa also, they are talking about licensing. Are they going to license? But there are ambiguities because the same time people are talking about making sure the licenses belong to Africa, but they're also getting funding from these other places. So I don't really know what's going on. For us, we've kept it quiet. You're the first people to actually see it. We didn't talk about it very much, but I was in South Africa and they're eager to actually see how we can connect to build these things. But some are involved in those kinds of things. But for us, it is very, very critical to actually have ownership of this, of this technology in Africa in some form, without it being in the West, without us saying we are representing people over there. My particular interest, like I said, I'm for the work of the church, meaning what we are interested in is those marginalized people to whom language is really a big thing, because land and agriculture, everything is happening in these languages. What we want to be doing is those are the direct beneficiaries of this, that we can actually get that done. And we archive ourselves. Actually, I had to teach a course now in archiving this semester just to make sure that I understand even what it is, because the archiving cannot be done the way it is. It has to archive real living Africans that we see when we don't see ourselves in museums like history has always put us. You go and read a book and you see like we are watching people on walls. Here we want voices, and we have tried to do those kinds. What kind of archiving should we even do in this new era? Final point is a big dream. I mean, of course, when you start doing these things, you lose your mind maybe in dreams. But the point is that if we collect this data properly and we use it a certain way and we record our voices, languages are learned not by people teaching children, but by children hearing it and interacting in it. So the dream is that supposing all these languages, all these 88 languages they're talking about here, they are all endangered. When I saw the Gen Z, what the Gen Z are doing in Kenya, they are very, very articulate in English, but our languages are moving away. They will get to 30 years or whatever critical year it comes, and then they have to say, now I want to learn my language, where is it? We have to think of digitizing, we have to think of archivizing these things as in real speech, in real environment, so that one can enter into it. As long as biology still works the way it does, and they'll learn these languages even without us being there. So it's a kind of crazy move about what language can do that I think of, because we are losing the languages. Our elders are no longer even being talked to already, so that's why you can see some things I do every week by taking things on YouTube so that elders can hear, because already our languages are not there. So it's a kind of element that I see where the real need is in what we're doing.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, I'll be quick because I want to make sure we all have time for questions. So you did not take too much time, John. Do not worry. But I mean, to Trevor, your questions of ethics really need to be at the forefront of these sorts of projects. And I mean, part of this is making sure that like when we have the conversations with people about, whether to make these things publicly available, one that, we've taken out any identifying information. So these letters are more for sort of like pedagogical purpose. Like you're not going to be able to track someone down. But also that like the way that we are sort of pitching this project is as an educational tool for people in Senegal and in Guinea and the diaspora of those places, many of whom don't today learn Ajami. A lot of younger people are not learning these things. And so seeing these texts and having them both transliterated into the Latin script that they can read, as well as translated there's a reason we translated them into French as well as into English, the official language of Senegal and Guinea. But these are also now texts that are available to people who, whose parents immigrated from these places to places like the US and France, and they may not have kept up with these languages. And so in the case of like Wolof Ajami, there's actually been a lot of uses in the diaspora. There's lots of YouTube videos with Wolof Ajami that are designed to sort of, help people understand religious beliefs, help them understand languages that they may not have, grown up with and things like that. So we see this, and the way the project was designed was really to make sure that this is as much, if not more, use in Senegal and Guinea than it is in the US. Not to say I've used it in class, it's been great. But we made sure all of the documents are like very, the file sizes aren't very large, so they're easily downloadable, that these things are easily accessible even in places without great internet, that they're all accessible on mobile platforms. You know, the whole idea was to make these things like open source and easily accessible, because the ones that are like at places like IFAN are great, but you have to go there, you have to check them out, you have to like look at them in person. And you know, if you live in a different part of Senegal, that's not feasible. And so accessibility, but also making sure that these conversations, you know, the letters that I talked about today were all given to us by the, you know, by the people who had the letters. They're not like things from 100 years ago or something like that. With a lot of the religious poetry, this was designed to be like publicly read, and a lot of the purposes of this Ajami writing is, you know, for religious purposes, is that it can be more easily read, you know, and communicated. And, you know, you have a poem that can be read out loud in a language that everyone understands. You just need to have one person who's literate in Ajami to read it. So these are like very, very important questions to any sort of like digitization project. And how do you make these things accessible? It's great to make them accessible to people globally, but how do you particularly make them accessible to people, you know, who they're most important to, who don't have access to them currently?
Do we have questions? Please, as you ask a question and introduce yourself, we have a nice group here today, and it would be great as you introduce yourself, we get to know everyone. So right over here.
Good morning. I'm Jacqueline Bethel Mugwe from the University of Wisconsin, and my question is for Professor Mugani. You mentioned Cameroon, and my heart skipped a beat because I'm from there, so I thought, what shall you say about us? But my question is about the potentials of ML and AI with unwritten languages. It seems that the conversation seems to be more about languages that are already written. And in Cameroon, there's a lot of languages that are not written. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around that process and the potentials for ML and AI for unwritten languages, and even the very process of using AI to speak a language and how it's an unwritten language and how it even comes out in the system. Is it going to be in you know, in the Western alphabet? What is it? What is it even visually going to even look like? And the process for the predominant way for the way something is spelled. Yeah, my mind is just a buzz. Thank you.
Yeah, I can respond to that. It's a very good question. One of the ways to look at it is that just like the Cameroonians themselves, they looked at me and they asked me, where are these 300 languages? What they're telling you is, what they're telling us is that the linguists will come and call Portuguese and Spanish different languages. But the people in the street, they can hear it's different, but they cannot communicate. And so what it turns out to be is that when you go through these places, when you said you're teaching 47 languages, it looks like you know, a small thing. Actually, those are themselves, just like going to Nigeria and finding out, these Yoruba that we talk about, who are they? You find there are so many other groups there that are actually just affiliated. So the place is more permeable than people think. In terms of spelling, we have to go to linguistics. And linguistics never gets it right, because they will get it right in terms of the pronunciation and so on. My own language, in fact, all Bantu languages that I know of, or African languages, the only language I know that is properly spelled is Yoruba. They have the tones there and all the other stuff. In my language, you can't read it if you don't, but I read it fluently. Because when I see it like this, I can see what happens. Then I'll pause and say, okay, the tone there did not get the right word. And you move around and so on. In other words, there is no exact way of writing these things. And in fact, Africans have really tried. One of the places that really impressed me is in Ko. In Ko, that actually I went to visit Mali and all the way to Guinea. And it was amazing. It was like it was a big movement that nobody was even aware of. I go to this place to just do the conference, and I would have people arrive by the hundreds. I tried it at Harvard, and basically there were hundreds of people coming there. And so when they decided to pray at lunchtime, they just occupied all the corridors and everything. And they were just very, very interested. But the idea of spelling, our languages are not spelled properly and all that, but that's now the idea of learning. So once you spell it out, you say, this is the way we are going to write it and all the other stuff. We read it in that kind of form. Every time Africans have tried to do scripts, writing types, and I've seen one in Luo, which I didn't even know existed. every time we try to do them, there's somebody who rushes for money to retranslate them back into English, to just change these things all the time and so on. But what I think is that so long as we speak it, language just says the whole language is between the lips and the up and the glotis, maybe just there. All the sounds you're using are coming from there. It doesn't matter how you say it. So it is writable. If I go there, I mean, even the Cameroonians, if you go there, you just take the recordings that we have, and that's what we are doing. We are actually taking all the recordings we have in radio. There are so many radio stations, and there are all these things that they're talking about, agriculture and so on. And so you record those, and then you have people writing them down. In Nairobi, I'm having a whole outfit that is actually doing these things. So 100,000, 25,000 sentences, using some mechanisms, you can actually get something to begin. But it is work that is manual labor. It is manual labor. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, great. Hi, my name's Rebecca Wall. I work at Loyola Marymount University. So thank you for all of your presentations. They were really great. And Trevor, thanks for your comments as well. In most cases, I agree. Short discussants, best, but I could have listened to you a little bit longer, but not too much. So I have a question that anyone of you could, it really seems like a conundrum at the heart of any of the types of work you all are doing. And I do something similar. So one thing that's really like vexing about digital initiatives is they have such, I guess you could say, egalitarian promise, like you all just mentioned in your response to the discussion, accessibility. But they're such resource intensive projects, right? And so that brings up, to Trevor's comments about unintended consequences, like ideas about ownership and resource availability. And I was thinking about the Harvard language program, right? It's really commendable because other institutions don't have the means, but they don't have the will to invest in language. So it's commendable, but in general with these projects, I'll stop rambling. I guess I'm kind of wondering how you think about trying to make projects more accessible with the material reality that it's very hard for non-elite, very wealthy institutions to build. So I don't expect you to solve that, but how do you think about these things? Because I also worry about sustainability and access and control when money is still housed in places like Harvard, Stanford. All right, thank you.
Yes, if you guys could answer the question of sustainability and give me a good answer, then that would be great. No, no, it's an excellent question because I think it is one of the most difficult questions that we have, and especially accessibility. Robin, do you want to add to that? Or Dave?
I'll defer to one of my colleagues to start.
My thinking about it is that Harvard is not doing this because it liked to do it in the past. I was told everyone was sent to BU, to Boston University across the river. There had to be some sea change somewhere in the university. And so, and yes, one of the things that happens is that I'm called by the deans quite a bit to actually explain things here and there because it is expensive and other things. But that is to say, it is not about because people go there. The language program works not because it was started. It could be started. There are many big schools with a lot of students, and you give African languages, they don't learn them. So for me, there is a moral element to even the whole thing. In our school, like I said, professors will be the ones telling people, if you don't do an African language, you'll have to meet the Mugane question, and we'll be asking you, do you speak the language of the people you're talking about? If you do not, stop talking. So that's well, it's just to be extreme in it. But the idea is that if the need is there, if this was a disease we were fighting, well, we have not done well in that department either. But if it was something that needed, then it can actually happen. But I think it is one thing that is very, very teaching about human relations, because our problem is not the language. It is the visibility and audibility of us. If 3% of the things published in the best journals, actually only 3% is from Africa, what are we talking about? When all solutions are coming from the other things, it's really all that stuff that I get engaged in, not the resources, because if students were coming in droves to learn the languages. Then at the university, we'll be doing something else. So we'll talk about whether it's riches or not, or whether it is actually the invisibility of Africa itself in the academy. And you'll see these things in people who are saying, we went to London to study, there was no Africa in African studies. What are they talking about? So those are the better questions for me to answer.
Our last question here.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Joey Bradshaw, Augusta University. Very nice to be here. Thank you guys. My question is similar to Rebecca's. I know we all talked about sort of our best intentions and unintended consequences. And Dave did a really good job of showing, I guess, the people who helped him along the way with the translation and transcription of Ajami. But my question is, as we're translating and transcribing African languages and plugging those into machine learning and AI, how can we imagine ways to situate our African partners in that system better? Not just as the transcribers of data, translating information into English, but situating them higher in the hierarchy of knowledge production, engaging with these systems, or even training AI. Or, I mean, I'm just asking you to sort of spitball for me. Give me your most egalitarian and best case scenario for engagement with African scholars and Africans in these projects.
Excellent final question for this session, and maybe each can take just a few seconds to say how we can better situate people.
Sure. One of the ideas I think that we had at Stanford was, well, first is to put different types of resources or digitized corpora in conversation with each other, right? So you have a more comprehensive response whenever you do get a response. But in terms of, well, okay, how do you choose those documented or digitized resources? I think at that stage, at the very early stage, you could ask African partners, what do you think would be important to make accessible or to be in conversation with these types of other resources in order to balance the narrative that comes out when you query the tool? That's one idea.
Dave, any final words?
Yeah, I will just be very brief, but I think a lot of this is Joey, as you pointed out, like really in terms of thinking about these hierarchies, right? It often becomes the researchers who are based at, in universities here who are the ones publishing based on this collective group project. So I published an article, I co-authored an article with my colleague Abubakar Jallo from this project. And we wrote it together, we discussed it together, and making sure that labor is like very visible. I mean, he's not an academic, so he doesn't need this for any sort of like academic, tenure and promotion process, but still making that labor like visible and clear, and making sure that, again, this isn't like a sort of passive, it's not like, oh, this person only helped with the initial phases. Like they were integral in all phases of this project. Like, in terms of the writing, in terms of, I mean, I did a little bit of stuff with this everyday stuff that wasn't part of the article that we wrote, but like the actual, if anyone wants to find it, was in Islamic Africa last year. It's entitled The Futa Jalan Ajami Tradition. And yeah, making sure that this is something that where the knowledge is produced alongside, our colleagues in African institutions.
Well, please join me in thanking them loudly for the whole panel on an excellent first panel. Please, if you have more questions, don't hesitate to catch them in between to ask more questions about this, but I'm sure we're going to be addressing many of the same questions as we go along. So thank you again. Wonderful first panel.
Great.